Welcome back. Where is Kim Jong-un talking about North Korea and North Korean leader? Truth is, no one knows, save for North Korean and Russian authorities. Here's what we are sure of. Kim and President Putin discussed possibilities for military cooperation in a highly scrutinized meeting for a suspected arms deal during their meeting on Wednesday at the Vostochny Space Center after Mr. Kim arrived in his private armored train. Now, Mr. Putin also said he would help Pyongyang develop satellites. But this does not sit well with the West. The U.S. says Moscow is buying weapons for its war on Ukraine and warned any help would violate UN resolutions. Mr. Putin has also accepted an invitation from Mr. Kim to visit North Korea, according to Pyongyang. Few heads of state have visited the closed-off state. In the meantime, South Korea's unification minister in charge of relations with the North says that the government has concerns over military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. Unification Minister Kim Young-ho said at a news conference with local journalists that the government worried deeply about such ties and arms trade between both countries. There's widespread concern in Seoul that North Korea would in turn receive advanced weapons technologies from Russia, including those related to military spy satellites, which would increase the threat posed by Kim's military nuclear program. And while they discuss areas of possible ties, the United Nations is calling on Russia and North Korea to abide by the Security Council resolutions amidst concerns of military cooperation between both nations. U.S. and South Korean officials have expressed concern that Kim Jong-un could provide weapons and ammunition to Russia, which has expended vast stocks in more than 18 months of war in Ukraine. But Moscow and Pyongyang have denied such intentions. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres signals Moscow has to tread carefully. More reactions on the Kim-Putin meeting. The U.S. State Department calls it troubling that Russia's talking about cooperation with North Korea on programs that potentially would violate UN Security Council resolutions. According to State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller, the Biden administration won't hesitate to impose more sanctions on Russia and North Korea if they conclude on any new arms deals.
When you see Kim Jong-un vowing to provide full, unconditional support for Russia's so-called sacred fight to defend its security interests, which of course is not what it's doing with respect to the war in Ukraine, that of course is troubling. When you see what looks to be increased cooperation and probably military transfers, as we've said for some time, we have reason to believe they were going to discuss military transfers. That is quite troubling and would potentially be in violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. And with respect to what any outcomes might be, we have taken a number of actions already to sanction entities that have brokered arms sales between North Korea and Russia, and we won't hesitate to impose additional actions if appropriate. That was what I was referring to in my reference to the multiple UN Security Council resolutions against North Korea's ballistic missile program, which Russia itself voted for and now could potentially be violating.
Alastair Morgan, who served as Britain's ambassador to North Korea from 2015 to 2018 and also coordinated the UN panel of experts, believes that Kim Jong-un leaving his country for the first time in 4 years signals a shift towards diplomatic or strategic political approaches. This change follows the failure of Hanoi summit in 2019 when the then U.S. President Donald Trump.
Jong-un's traveling outside the country is a sign of opening up. That's one context. The other context is the whole diplomatic approach or strategic or political approach, military approach too, that the DPRK has taken since the failure of the Hanoi summit in April 2019. And this, of course, has evolved, but it has become increasingly clear from DPRK statements by Kim Jong-un that the DPRK is not prepared to enter into dialogue with the United States, that it has no intention of ending its nuclear and ballistic missile programs, and indeed intends to strengthen those and to make them ever more credible. And in terms of the messaging that the DPRK gave out, that was entirely consistent with this at the summit. And it is an attempt to push a message that the United States is an enemy, that imperialism is the threat, and to see an equivalence between Russian action in Ukraine and the DPRK stance in the peninsula.
We're seeing what could be, the beginning of a longer-term tightening of the relationship between Pyongyang and Moscow. This is, again, something that, there have been some predictions about. And then I think the other thread that needs to be picked up with respect to that is to what extent Moscow and Pyongyang tightening their relationship is going to fit in with the possibility of both of them tightening their relations with China and forming a sort of triangular counterbalance or counterweight to the U.S., South Korea, Japan alliance that we've seen. From North Korea's perspective, this is obviously beneficial because it allows it to perhaps get some breathing space from having so much reliance on China currently. It's a bit of a mystery, I think, how China's going to react to that. So I think it's, at least on paper, one would expect that China would welcome this in some respects. And it might be happy to have another partner deal with problematic North Korea and take some of the pressure off of China. On the other hand, China probably doesn't want to lose some bits of whatever control it feels like it has over North Korea right now. And to the extent that North Korea has other options for cooperation, China obviously would perhaps lose a little bit of influence. So I think the Chinese reaction to this is something that we should watch out for going forward.
More now on the conflict in Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine now are trading regular overnight drone attacks. Russia says it has destroyed several Ukrainian drones in the border regions of Bryansk and Belgorod in the night intervening Wednesday and Thursday, although no casualties have been reported so far. Russia's defense ministry said 6 drones had been shot down in 4 separate locations over the Bryansk region, which is roughly equidistant between Kyiv and Moscow. Bryansk Governor Alexander Bogomaz said there were no damage or casualties, and operational and emergency services are working on the scene. The ministry adds that another drone was destroyed further south over the Belgorod region on Wednesday evening, saying the attack had been thwarted. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Air Force claims it downed 17 out of 22 drones sent over its territory by Russia overnight. Drone debris is reported to have partially destroyed a house in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Ukraine is also said to have destroyed a Russian air defense system near the town of Yevpatoria in Crimea in an overnight drone and missile attack conducted by the Security Service of Ukraine and Navy on Thursday. Russia said its air defenses had shot down 11 attack drones overnight over Crimea, which Russia annexed from Ukraine in 2014. The family of U.S. journalist Evan Gershkovich are appealing to the United Nations for help in their bid to get him freed in Russia, where he was detained in March on spying charges that carry up to 20 years in prison. Standing with the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, outside the UN Security Council, Gershovich's parents and sister said they had submitted a petition to the UN working group on arbitrary detention. The working group has a mandate from the Geneva-based UN Human Rights Council to investigate cases of deprivation of liberty imposed arbitrarily or inconsistently with the international standards by sending appeals and communications to governments to clarify or bring attention to cases.
Russia's actions are beyond cruel, and they are a violation of international law. 2 wrongfully detained Americans, Brittany Griner and Trevor Reed, have now been reunited with their families. But Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan still languish in Russian prisons on baseless charges. Mark my word, the United States will not rest until Evan and Paul and all wrongfully detained Americans are home, safe and sound. And we urge the international community and the United Nations to stand with us, to stand on the side of justice and to condemn Russia's flagrant violations of international law. It has been nearly 6 months since Evan was arrested. To that end, Evan's parents have delivered a petition to the United Nations, a petition that calls on this institution to make clear that Evan Gershkovich has been arbitrarily detained and to push for his immediate release. We urge all member states to join this call for Evan's release and the release of all those who have been wrongfully detained.
As you can imagine, this is a very difficult time for our family. Evan has now been wrongfully detained by Russia for nearly 6 months for doing his job as a journalist. We are still in shock. Every day is a day too long. I miss him every day. Evan loves being a journalist. His passion is reporting the news and helping people understand Russia and the Russian people. He's always been curious about the world and loved traveling. He cares deeply about people. His reporting has kept the world informed, and we all miss reading his stories. Now what he writes is letters. We've been able to send letters back and forth, and it gives me comfort to see how strong he is. We are glad he's kept his sense of humor, teasing me that the prison food reminds him of my cooking. We are all very concerned, especially since it's been so long, and we want him to come home as soon as possible.
And as we mentioned earlier, Alistair Morgan, who served as Britain's ambassador to North Korea from 2015 to 2018 and also coordinated the UN panel of experts, believes that Kim Jong-un leaving his country for the first time in 4 years signals a shift towards diplomatic political approaches. Now, this change follows the failure of the Hanoi summit that was years ago in 2019. Joining us now to discuss this further is former British police officer and national security risk strategist Vince Onyekwelu. He's in Anambra State currently. Mr. Onyekwelu, thank you for joining us on the program today. I want to start with my first question to you. Why is it so difficult to determine the North Korean leader's whereabouts?
It's not difficult because the North Korean security apparatus, the same with the Russian security apparatus, does not feel comfortable for the meeting between the North Korean president and the Russian president to be monitored by the outside world. When I mean monitored by the outside world, currently in the international security system, there has been so many leakages of top security information, and obviously the Russians having a war ongoing in Ukraine, and the North Korean being part of the so-called axis of evil doesn't feel comfortable for any other nation apart the two nations to know what they are discussing. Actually, it shouldn't be anybody's business, but obviously it has become the international community's business. So I think the North Koreans have every right, the same as Russians, to have a mutual secret discussion about their international collaboration in a very dangerous world that have chosen to isolate them from the rest of the world. So that is why they're keeping very secret just in the two organizations.
Okay, well then let's talk about this arms deal he intends to sign with the Russian president. Russia has such an equipped, strong military. I mean, what could North Korea really offer them?
North Korea have surprisingly relied on their own ingenuity to build a military warfare. And surprisingly, in a country that has been isolated from the international community for decades, we are actually surprised that North Korea has been able to build long-range missiles. North Korea also has capacity to have built a nuclear warhead, although the international world is saying that their nuclear warhead is not yet completed. Just last week, North Korea launched a submarine that is capable of also carrying nuclear warhead. And surprisingly, in the international community of nations, they always respect any nation that has the technology, the innovation, and the tactics, not to be borrowing money from the International World Bank or from the IMF, for a nation that can be self-reliant, that can look inwardly and tap the ingenuity and the knowledge of their citizenry to build a powerful nation. So that is why the world is worried that if North Korea, despite being shut out from the international community, has been able to build such long-range missiles, build submarines, build all kinds of nuclear-capable tactics. Regularly, we see them testing their long-range missiles between the Japan Sea and the Korean Sea. So I think that is why the world is worried. The world don't trust them because they've been able to find their own people without asking for any financial support or any technological support from anybody.
All right. We do apologize for the cutting out of the audio from your side to our viewers. Mr. Onyekwelu, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you.
Thank you.